working closely with engineering, working with customers, looking through GitHub issues. We just sort of, try to find the things that are going to be the most impactful.
That's Nate Totten, product manager for Salesforce Developer Tooling. I'm Josh Birk, a developer evangelist at Salesforce, and here on the Salesforce Developer Podcast, you will hear stories and insights from developers for developers. Today, we sit down and talk to Nate about a lot of the recent changes that have come to tooling, and also things that are on the roadmap, as well as to kick things off, how their release cycle works.
We release typically every Thursday. So yeah, we have a weekly release cadence. We do time some things based on the 3 releases. The day that, I don't actually know what it's called publicly, we call it R2 internally, but whatever, essentially the day that all the orgs are upgraded to the new version, we do typically do a release, because sometimes we have some stuff that's tied to a new API version or something. But yeah, we release every week, which I think, it's nice because it allows us to release less complete features and get feedback on them. So, I guess you could take that in a good way or a bad way, but I think of it as a positive, where we can kind of do experimentation. We can involve the customer in the process. I mean, all of the stuff we build, or almost all the stuff we build, is open source, and we really like to involve our developer community sort of as early in the process as possible, and one of the ways we do that is, rather than spending 3 months building a feature, spend a couple weeks building it, get it out there, get the feedbacks, put telemetry in it, see the response, and then iterate on it. And I think that helps us build a better developer product.
That sounds like a really tight, communication feedback loop. You're putting things out there, you're getting communication back. What does the loop actually look like? What are you using to communicate something like that on such a rapid cycle?
I mean, it's a lot of channels, from, people message me on Twitter, direct message me a lot. Sometimes they email me. I mean, we use GitHub really heavily, which I quite like because, it gives us more of a direct sort of channel to sort of communicate on specific issues with some of the customers. It's sometimes not perfect. It's hard to like have an SLA on GitHub issues and stuff like that, but it's a nice place to really work and get feedback with the community. But it's a lot of places, it's all the forums, the Trailblazer, Trailhead forums, and Twitter and anything else in between. So yeah, it's really more of a constant process. Like, because our releases are so frequent, there's not a lot of like, oh, okay, we're going to plan to get this thing in on this exact Thursday. It's really just we release stuff when it's ready. If it's checked into the main branch in GitHub, it gets released. And then, we're just constantly gathering feedback and constantly iterating on features.
So let's talk about some of the big changes that we've seen recently. For one thing, there was several updates to how Autocomplete works in a couple of places. Can you describe those updates?
Yeah, I mean, this is really an area that we're always working on. We've recently been spending a lot of time on Apex in particular for autocomplete. This is a big area. It's not perfect, but, we've been fixing lots of bugs. We've been working a lot on performance. One of the things we've been trying to focus on is making sure things run smoothly in larger code bases. So, folks that have thousands or whatever of Apex classes or files, with lots of lines of code, et cetera. Sometimes there can be some perf issues. So yeah, we've spent a lot of times on those, and there's also some of the like nice, just kind of convenience features. Like recently we added support for like Apex doc. Well, we improved the support for Apex doc. So like when you get a code completion, you sort of see a little bit nicer inline documentation for, say, a method or class or something.
Gotcha. I mean, autocomplete is kind of one of those things that's like when you see it in VS Code, it just kind of feels so... it's like somewhere between simple and magical. Like it just sort of pops in there. But I would assume it's a pretty huge technical challenge to really get that thing to pop up like that.
Yeah, it is, particularly with Apex. So, one of the advantages of like LWC, for example, is that we really are, being that it's really fairly standards based. It's HTML and JavaScript. Like we're actually building on top of, there is a lot of custom stuff there, but a lot of what we get in terms of autocomplete and things like that, we almost get for free or partially for free from, what VS Code provides out of the box for JavaScript or HTML. With Apex, though, it's entirely custom. We have to write the whole thing. And yeah, it does get pretty complicated. I will admit that sometimes as a product manager, you always want more. And, I will admit sometimes I'm like, why can't we just get it's so simple. Like it's just a list of suggestions, right? But it turns out that it's a pretty complicated problem. One of the really interesting things actually from way back when we first started this is the thing that provides autocomplete is called the language server. So the Apex language server. So one of the interesting problems there is a language server actually it's similar to the compiler in the sense that it's like parsing code, creating this tree, and then so that you can sort of look up state or whatever in a certain place in that tree and provide relevant then suggestions. But normally in a compiler, effectively, like it really only cares if the code works. If the code doesn't work, if it's invalid, it just explodes basically, right? Like, and you think about that, like deploying Apex code to an org. If it doesn't compile, it just doesn't work, and then we don't need to go any further, and we don't need to worry about it, right? Because there's no reason for it to be there, and nothing needs to happen. But with the language server, that's not the case. Like your code is almost always not in a working state. So a lot of the work we had to do was go into the compiler and make it handle like partial invalid conditions, so that we could provide completion so that you could get your code into a valid state.
It looks like we have some updates to the project template to make it easier to run Apex and also to run Sockle.
So yeah, those were always there. And this is actually one of the rare cases where I write code. I actually created that pull request. Every now and again, they let me do that. One of our engineer leads, Luis, he sort of always hassles me because, and rightfully so, because I do send pull requests for features, but I will admit I almost never include tests in them. So he accepts he gets the pull request, and I'm like, hey, can we get this in? And then he's like, yeah, and then he's just gonna go, and then he hopefully can spend some time and fix it and add tests. Yeah.
Nice.
So, excuse me just one second.
No problem.
Kid is crying. The baby woke up for the nap. I'll probably just hold him while I'm talking, and it should be fine. Good times. Do you have kids or?
I have 2 cats. I mean, honestly, like it's so weird actually, because like my personal life in a lot of ways is simply not disrupted at all. Yeah. I already work from home. I've been doing it for years. My wife, she's been working at a flower shop, but it's really kind of more like a hobby job for her kind of thing. So the fact that she's home is actually not weird for us at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And you don't homeschool cats, right? So it's like it's not a big deal. So, but at the same time, I was on the line with somebody else who's kind of in a similar situation earlier, and I'm like, but it's still weird, right? Like the world getting so disrupted right now that it's like it's impossible not to be disrupted, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we have a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old, and it's it's chaos right now, basically. So yeah, my wife and I both work from home as well. So, the difference is just that we have the kids around all day because daycare closed, and schools, and obviously, so.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we can champion on, and we'll take what we can get. And I think if there's ever a time that I can put an asterisk on an episode and be like, hey, who the guest is on this episode? It's Nate's kid. I believe the world will understand. So I think we're good.
Yeah, the occasional screaming in the background. So yeah, he's supposed to nap, but as tends to happen, he woke up early.
Has an agenda of his own.
Yeah, actually, sorry. Let me just see if my wife can hold him.
Yep, I did actually. It was the episode I did with Chris Peterson. So I've got 2 cats. One of them is a very rambunctious 2-year-old, and she was sleeping in the study when I started the interview. And I usually kick her out, but she was fast asleep. So I'm like, she's going to be fine. It won't be a problem. And then like the moment Chris and I actually start recording, she's on my desk. And 5 seconds later, she's trying to sleep on the laptop. And then 5 seconds after we're done with the interview, she was back in the study. Like, she's just all she was doing, troubling around the laptop while we were doing the interview. And as soon as we were done, she's like, yeah, it's boring now.
Nice. Okay, cool. My wife actually was able to take him. She's just sitting at her desk doing some work. So, yes. All right, cool. You've got like a blooper reel here where you can be like, there's a screaming baby. Right. right. Cool. All right. Now I'm good again.
Okay. So another thing that's always been difficult within, or not maybe difficult, but a little bit of a challenge, at least with VS Code, has been managing orgs themselves. What kind of enhancements are we seeing there?
Yeah. So we've gone through an evolution of this. And this is actually one of the areas that, kind of demonstrates the philosophy of like little releases, get the feedback, et cetera. So, we started in the very, very beginning. There was a little button down at the bottom, in the status bar where you could click and open the org. And then, people were saying, it'd be really nice if I could, see the list of orgs. And so, so we added like an org picker. So then now there's a button where you can see the org that's currently authorized. And there's a little button that you can still open the org. But then if you click that authorize button, it shows you like a list of all the other orgs. And we kind of did a couple iterations on that. I can't remember exactly the flow, but it kind of went from, I think you could see the list, you could pick it. And then we made it so like you could create a scratch org, or, we added some other functionality like authorize a dev hub, et cetera. So yeah, we've expanded on that, just to make it kind of a little easier to switch through, things you could do in the CLI, but now things you can do through the UI. And then you can also see in the org browser, if you're connected to a sandbox, you can see the org that you're connected to and, see all the metadata in there. And that's something that I think we'll continue to iterate on. Like we may eventually make it so, you can maybe see multiple orgs in there if you're working with, multiple sandboxes or something like that. Maybe where you can see a list of your different scratch orgs and you can like delete them or something. So, but it's just one of those things, like we get the feedback, we prioritize based on the feedback, and we go from there.
Nice. And it also looks like it's easier than ever to track changes between your org and what you're doing locally.
Yeah, we're continuing to improve on that. I mean, we've started, again, very iterative approach. Like started with that org browser where you could pull changes from your org, but there was no, that was it. Like you could pull it, and if you're using Git, it worked pretty well because, you could pull a change, see then the diff in Git, and see what the difference between your org, whatever. But obviously not everyone's using source control. So we then enabled it so you could diff between, your local stuff and what's in your org. And then we're expanding on that to do even more. We're like, where we detect conflicts when you try to do a retrieve or a deploy, and then warn you about it. Initially it's just going to be a warning. Eventually the goal is to like give you some UI to resolve the conflicts. So just continuing to make that better and better over time.
And focusing to that local development angle. So we've got local development out as a beta, I believe. How does the beta work? How can people get into that?
Yeah. So right now it's local development for LWC. So, we've effectively taken, LWC being written in JavaScript, it can run on a Node server. The compiler's in Node and it runs client side. So we were able to do something that was, up to this point unique to the Salesforce platform, where, we could actually take a piece of the platform out and build a local experience for it. Most of the platform is, it's harder with something like Apex or in the past with Aura, because it's like super tangled into this giant monolith of, what an org is. So it's hard to take one bit out of it and run it locally. But with the way LWC was written, we were actually able to do that. So we built the team built, and also working with the other teams, of course, built a local server that, compiles your Lightning Web components and then runs a server locally and then allows you to, to preview those. Yeah, as you mentioned, right now it's in beta. We're working to continue to improve on that, and then eventually ship a kind of a V1, hopefully fairly soon.
And if I recall from Greg talked about this briefly, all you have to do to get into the beta is just basically add the plugin to the CLI. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we have different, sometimes beta or preview or whatever, a lot of people think of. There's sort of different definitions for what we do with tooling versus what's in like an org. Yeah, our beta is literally just install a plugin. Everyone can get it. It's totally free, available. You don't need to sign up or anything for it. So yeah, you just install a plugin and it works. Once we have the V1 release, it will be included with the Salesforce CLI out of the box. So there won't be any additional install step even.
It'll just be SFDX update.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. And to kind of pull that into a full loop, we can also now run jest tests in VS Code. So there's a lot of things we can do with JavaScript without having to go back to the platform.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You can run jest tests locally and you can see that, run them and see them visualized inside of VS Code for sure. Yeah. And, that's something that we want to keep doing more of. it's not that we're probably ever going to bring, Apex locally, but we want to start as much as possible, start bringing more bits of the platform to run locally. So one example is Lightning layout pages, or as most as developers know them as like the flexi pages, right?
Yeah.
It's a metadata file, an XML document that describes the layout of a particular page. Like, we can take the logic, we'll probably re-implement it in Node, whereas it's written in Java in the actual org. But we can take the logic out and build it the same way, so that we could actually have a local experience for that flexi page, just as it would be in the org. And so we're going to try to keep doing more stuff like that to bring more and more of the org locally. And then for the things that we can't do locally, we'll try to enable like a seamless proxy or integration experience. So for example, with LWC local development today, like you can do data operations, pull a pick list, or do CRUD on an object or whatever, and that doesn't run locally, because it needs an org. But we proxy those requests to the org, so it feels very seamless and very local.
Gotcha. Is there a feature in the CLI or in VS Code that you really want to give a shout out to, that you really want to make sure developers are utilizing?
Let's see. Well, one that comes to mind, I guess, right now is our Apex replay debugger. I think that's something that it's not a new thing, but I have telemetry on the usage, and the usage is still lower than I think it should be. Like, I think that it's one of the most underutilized features for, obviously it doesn't apply if you're just developing LWC or Aura, but if you're developing Apex, like, that's a really good developer debugging experience. I mean, you can step through your code, you can, put a breakpoint, inspect variables, et cetera. It's not real time, but you can download a log, you can run a test, then download a log and then step through it. And it feels like real time, right?
And so this is a podcast, so I can't really put up a safe harbor / forward-looking statement slide.
Sure.
But everybody can kind of take a pause and visualize that in their heads. Anything on the roadmap that you both want and can give a shout out to?
Yeah. So, there's a couple things that I think we'll continue to iterate over the next year and focus on. One of them is going to be local development. As we talked about earlier, we have the V1 coming out, soonish. Everyone probably saw or hopefully everyone saw the announcement for Evergreen at Dreamforce. We're looking to enable, a local development experience that's sort of integrated with the LWC development experience, with Evergreen as well, because that's sort of the same thing. It's Node.js, so we can extract parts of that and run it locally. So we have some plans on some new just convenience things inside of VS Code. For a long time, we've been wanting to add more, more schema-based validation. So for the JSON files, like the scratch arc definition, the project definition, we have a schema for that provides some limited validation and code completion, but it's not complete. Like in the scratch arc definition, for example, we would like to have that file be auto-generated to include like all of the scratch arc features. So that, as you're typing, it validates like, hey, this is if you mistype the feature, whatever, because that sort of stuff is like, it causes pain. It's maybe minor sometimes, but it's just inconvenient. And then we also want to do the same thing for the XML files, so that you get, validation and code completion for the metadata files. Let's see. Oh, yeah. And actually, one other really cool thing that, that we're working on is we've shipped some initial improvements to Sockle, but we're continuing to kind of invest in that. So we shipped it was like a beta or preview. I mean, it's available for everyone, but it's definitely not complete of, full code completion for Sockle. But we're going to continue to iterate on that to make it easier to write Sockle queries, both in, a .sockle file, but also inside of Apex. We've been investigating tools around performance analysis and profiling in Apex. That's something we're still doing a lot of research on. I don't know where we're going to go there, but this kind of I'll use this as an opportunity. If anyone has any, wants to chat about that, where they would like to see us build tooling to help, make more performant Apex code, that it's something we're looking into. I'd be happy to chat with anyone. Yeah. So, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, check out the roadmap. Let us know what you think. But yeah, I think we're going to have some pretty exciting stuff.
And that's our show. Now, before we go, I did ask Nate about his favorite non-technical hobby. It turns out it's one that's actually near and dear to my heart, or more specifically, my dad's heart: woodworking.
Yeah, so I've built I built our dining room table a while ago, which my wife was very happy about. She was wanting a proper dining room table for a long time, and I kept not wanting to buy one because I wanted to build it, and I eventually, she definitely wanted to buy it a lot sooner than I built it, but eventually I got around to building it. I've a few other things, just some end tables and some shelves and things like that. So, I'd say I try to do like one or two things a year. Maybe when I'm older and retired, I'll be able to do more than that. But for now, that's about all I can manage.
Nice. Well, I got to tell you, that's actually a really cool hobby. And the corner bookshelf that I'm talking into right now is something that my dad built, and I've had since.
Very nice.
It's actually kind of a special piece of furniture for me.
Yeah, that's actually the reason I do it as well. My desk, actually, I have my desk, my bookshelf, and a little like a toolbox that's kind of drawers in my office are actually all things my dad built. So he did a lot of woodworking, and so I kind of, as I got older, I started to get into it. So
thanks to Nate for the great conversation about Salesforce developer tooling, and my thanks to you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast for previous episodes, show notes, and links to your favorite services. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week.